There are two distinct types of silence in this world. There's the cozy, comfortable kind, like when Maya and I would share a single pair of headphones on a 3-hour bus ride back from college, not saying a word because we didn't need to. And then, there's the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind where you can hear the ice melting in your glass, the clinking of expensive silverware against fine china, and the synchronized breathing of an entire family waiting for you to make a mistake. Right now, I was trapped in the second kind. Exactly 48 hours ago, Maya had cornered me at our usual coffee spot. She was pacing back and forth, her voice an octave higher than usual, which was my absolute first clue that she was on the verge of a panic attack. "Just one dinner, Leo," she had pleaded, locking her dark brown eyes onto mine. "That's all I'm asking. My cousin Chloe is flying in from New York with her flawless corporate attorney fiancé, and my dad. Well, you know how my dad gets. He's already preparing the spreadsheet of my life failures. If I show up alone, the entire night will be an interrogation about my single status and my career choices. Please, just be my temporary boyfriend for 3 hours." We had been best friends for 6 years. I knew her patterns, her fears, and the exact way her eyebrows furrowed when she was stressed. Naturally, because I was completely incapable of saying no to her, I agreed. We spent the entire drive to her parents' estate practicing our origin story. We decided we met at a local charity gala 6 months ago. It sounded much more sophisticated than the truth, which was that we actually met in our college dorm lobby while we were both in our sweatpants fighting over the last bag of microwave popcorn. We memorized fake milestones, established a mutual love for old foreign films, and swore we wouldn't break character. It was supposed to be a foolproof plan. But as I pulled my car into her parents' long, winding driveway, looking at the massive colonial house glowing under the evening lights, a knot began to tie itself tightly in my stomach. The moment the heavy oak front door opened, the performance began. Maya immediately slipped her hand into mine. Her fingers were freezing, and she was gripping my palm so tightly I thought my knuckles might snap. I gave her a reassuring squeeze, looking down at her. She looked breathtaking. She'd put on a cream-colored sweater that made her look soft, elegant, and entirely out of my league. "Deep breaths," I whispered to her, as her mother walked over to greet us with open arms. For the first hour, I felt like an undercover agent in a high-budget movie. I shook hands, nodded politely, and played the part of the doting, successful boyfriend flawlessly. When Uncle Robert asked about my career, I gave a confident, polished answer. When Aunt Sarah pointedly asked how a guy like me ended up with a girl like Maya, I looked right at Maya, smiled, and said, "I got incredibly lucky. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time." Maya blushed. It looked so real that for a fleeting second, I forgot we were reading from a script we wrote in a Honda Civic. But then, we were called into the dining room for the main course. We took our seats. Maya sat to my left, her posture unusually rigid. Directly across from us, commanding the head of the long mahogany table, sat her father, Arthur. Arthur wasn't a loud man, but he possessed an aura of absolute authority. He was a retired judge, a man who literally spent his entire life analyzing human behavior, detecting lies, and delivering verdicts. He sat with his hands folded, his piercing gray eyes shifting between Maya and me like a surgical laser. While the rest of the table was engaged in a loud, animated discussion about Chloe's upcoming destination wedding, Arthur remained entirely silent. He barely touched his food. Every time I took a sip of water or adjusted my posture, I could feel his gaze cutting right through me. He wasn't hostile, he was just evaluating, and that was far more terrifying. Underneath the table, hidden by the heavy linen tablecloth, Maya's hand found mine again. She was trembling. I opened my palm, letting her interlock her fingers with mine, trying to anchor her. Chloe's fiancé was in the middle of a tedious, self-absorbed story about a corporate merger when Arthur suddenly cleared his throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it had the immediate effect of a gavel striking a block. The entire room fell instantly silent. Arthur placed his wineglass down with a slow, deliberate click. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the edge of the table, his eyes locking directly onto mine. "Maya," Arthur said, his deep voice slicing through the quiet room. "You can stop now." Maya stiffened next to me, her breath hitching. "Stop what, Dad?" she asked, trying desperately to keep her voice steady. The theater, Arthur said simply, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. The charity gala story, the 6-month timeline, the overly polite distance you two are trying so hard to maintain in front of your mother and me. My heart dropped directly into my shoes. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my chest. We were caught. The jig was up. I looked at Maya's terrified expression, and a wave of guilt hit me. I had ruined her night. I immediately began to slide my hand away from hers under the table, preparing to sit up straight, take the blame, and apologize for disrespecting his home with a childish lie. But before I could pull away, Arthur spoke again, and what he said made the room spin. "I've spent 30 years on the bench, Leo," Arthur said, his stern expression softening into something incredibly rare. A genuine, knowing smile. "I know what a forced performance looks like, but I also know what truth looks like. I've watched you two for the last 6 years. I've seen the way you look at my daughter when she's not paying attention. I've noticed how you instinctively shift your position to stand between her and any discomfort in a room." He paused, looking at his daughter, whose jaw was slightly slack. "And I know how she looks at you, Maya. You don't look at a 6-month boyfriend with that level of absolute, unshakable trust. You look at someone who has been your home for a very long time." Arthur picked up his wine glass again, looking at me with a nod of approval. "So yes, your little timeline is a complete lie. But the relationship? Leo, I know you're not pretending. And quite frankly, neither of you are nearly clever enough to hide an affection that massive from a house full of people who love you." The silence that followed wasn't the terrifying kind anymore. It was a soft, warm, revelatory quiet. Aunt Sarah smiled gently into her napkin. Maya's mother just shook her head with a knowing grin. I sat there, completely frozen, processing the words of a man who had just dismantled my entire defense system in less than 60 seconds. I slowly turned my head to look at Maya. She wasn't looking at her father anymore. She was looking up at me. Her eyes were wide, glittering with a mixture of shock and an incredibly raw, unfiltered vulnerability. And right there, under the warm light of her parents' dining room, her hand didn't let go of mine. Instead, she gripped it even tighter. "He's right, you know," she whispered, her voice trembling so slightly only I could hear it. "About the lie?" I asked, my voice barely working. "About us," she breathed, a beautiful, breathless smile breaking across her face. "We're terrible actors, Leo, because we've been trying to act like we're just friends when the truth has been staring us in the face for years." In that moment, the entire world outside of that table completely faded away. The fear of ruining our friendship, the years of hiding my feelings, the anxiety of not being enough, it all evaporated. Her father hadn't exposed a scam. He had handed us a mirror. We didn't confess our love with a grand speech in front of her extended family. We didn't need to. The way we looked at each other for the rest of that dinner said everything that needed to be said. We had walked into that house pretending to be in love to escape a temporary awkwardness. But we walked out of that house realizing that the only thing we had actually been pretending was that we weren't.
Sometimes it takes a person on the outside to point out the very thing we're too terrified to see ourselves. Thank you for listening and spending this time with us on the Velvet Porch Stories. If tonight's story brought a smile to your face or reminded you of a hidden truth in your own life, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join our cozy community. Tell me in the comments below, have you ever had a friend who everyone else knew was your soulmate before you did? Until next time, keep your stories warm and your loved ones closer. Take care.